opinions about hymns, and I'd actually like to hear some of those. But first off, does anybody know what a hymn is and how is it different from a song? What makes a hymn a hymn?
Praise.
What?
Praise.
There's songs that are full of praise too. That's okay. Yeah, sure.
Just being in the hymnal.
That's a very, very brilliant answer. Anybody else want to venture a guess on what makes a hymn a hymn?
Song of worship?
Song of worship. Yes.
Does it have to be a four-part harmony? No.
Doesn't have to. Think about verses. A lot of hymns have multiple verses to the same tune.
Poem.
Poem, right? And does anyone want to guess what the year is of the hymn in our red hymnal that is, like, how old is our oldest hymn in the hymnal, roughly?
That's a great question.
1760.
The music or the words?
The music and the words.
1500.
Yeah.
300.
That'd be
Way back.
310.
1100.
When?
1410.
Way, way back.
There's plain song.
310. Oh.
Yes. Well, you're very close. In the 5th century, or 400 AD, roughly. And so Gregorian chant, the monks were one of the first people to take the Psalms, and all the words come from the Bible, the early hymns, and then turn them into strophic, repetitive verses on the same tune. Can anyone think of a Gregorian chant that we have sung as a hymn this year?
O come Emmanuel? Is that what you
Yes, you got it! Oh my gosh, that is the one! O come, Emmanuel. Fantastic. And that brings me to another point of, you've probably noticed that sometimes we do hymns with words that are not what you're used to. And sometimes it can feel completely upsetting. Like, why are we doing these words? So I will just say that O come, Emmanuel is one of those where I personally prefer the old hymn, the old words that are in the red hymnal. And there are many, this brings me to how do we choose hymns and some of the tricky things that we think about as a staff in how we choose hymns. But before we do that, I just want to see how many of you were raised in the Catholic Church. One. Okay, how many of you were raised as a Lutheran? Any lapsed Lutherans? Okay, we have Lutheran, Catholic. Any Quakers?
Also,
Put your hat.
The Quaker, that's without any hymns really. Well, we do have some actually. "'Tis the Gift to Be Simple" is one of our tried and true songs. Anyone from the Methodist tradition? Anyone from Episcopal world? Ah,
Look at all those. No wonder
yes.
they're all high.
Interesting. Anyone from the who was raised in the Unitarian Church? Okay.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
We have, is that 3? Okay, 3 people raised Unitarian. How about UCC? Anyone raised as a UCC?
I'm sort of half.
Okay. Are you kind of like this?
Half. Well, no, I'm more in one.
So the
Hey, Baptist, and they have the best hymns.
Baptist?
Pentecostals think different.
Okay. Anyone who has been an agnostic and maybe still, actually, we don't need to go any further because the point is that everyone from a different tradition knows different hymns. So even if you grew up as a Catholic, you still know 70 or 80 hymns that will be slightly different from other Catholics because there's so much variety in the different hymnals and the history of choosing hymns as time goes on. And then all of us think that we have some basic hymns that we all know, like Joy to the World. We all know Joy to the World, probably. But really, the overlap, we all know 70 or 80 at least different hymns from one another and different words. So when we're choosing hymns, and before we get into the hymnals and all the cool stuff in these hymnals, Here are some of the things that we think about when we choose hymns, just so that you can be empathetic with our situation of trying to choose from all the options that we have, from not only these two, but the supplement to the Gray hymnal and then the New Century hymnal. We think of the theme of the month, how well people know the tune. We consider inclusive language, which sometimes gets it right and sometimes doesn't quite work. We think of the mood of the hymn for the opening and the mood for the closing, and what is a prayer hymn and what will lead into the reading. We think about introducing new hymns with the choir singing them first, so that people in the pews feel, oh yeah, I've kind of heard this, maybe last week. So with the Ubi Caritas that we sang today as a benediction, you as a congregation will be singing this. Maybe next week, maybe the following week. We think about the season. Is it a spring-like hymn? Is it a winter, Christmassy, season of the year, liturgical season? And we also try to factor in old favorites. So I have a list of all the hymns, the top 25 that this church has chosen here, and we take those into consideration too. It's an inexact science, and of course we're trying to be an open and inclusive church. So it's all done as a group, and it's actually pretty fun to do. And like today, I wasn't sure if every time we feel a spirit would work. And in my mind, I was thinking this is for Black History Month, and it also feels like the right response to the outreach. And I couldn't believe how, with gusto, everyone sang. It was very moving. So you probably have heard of some of the top hymn writers throughout history. We have in these two hymnals. If you were to look in the indexes, you would find certain people's names have tons of numbers next to them. Does anyone want to guess, or maybe you know, as from history, some of the names of famous hymn writers in, it could be from, German, English, American. Can anyone think of some hymn writers?
Isaac Watts.
Isaac! I primed him. Yeah, I prepped the choir with
Martin Luther, yeah.
Martin Luther, yes, one of the founding fathers of our strophic verse style singing happened with Martin Luther. Anybody else come to mind? You can cheat. You can look in the back of the hymnal.
Bach, but it was chorales that were included primarily.
Right. And so Bach wrote a lot of chorales, and we of course have many of those in the red hymnal, and some of them have made it into the gray hymnal. What about Charles Wesley or John Wesley? Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
They were the founders of the Methodist Church, and I learned a lot of interesting facts about how they went to Oxford, and they were teased because they would like meet and discuss the classics, and they would have communion with each other. They had like a little group, and you have to forgive me because this knowledge is not actually, it's been in my brain for about 24 hours, so I'm trying to act like I've known this for years. I mean, I do actually know a lot from playing hymns for years, but so let's see, other questions. Why don't you take a look in your red hymnal and see if all of you can find, it's going to be in the 500 pages, that is called a metrical index. Because this is something that a lot of people have no idea what it means. And we're just going to go into that a little bit.
567.
567, okay. So in the metrical index, in the red, there's some other hymnals if anyone needs one. You'll see there are all these numbers, right? Like 877, 8787, and CMD, and what that represents are the syllabic counts of each line of the poem. And the cool thing about this is that we can take the syllabic form of, say, love divine, all loves excelling, and we can look at that form, which is 8787 D, because it's doubled, 8787, 8787. And Love Divine, All Loves Excelling is in the red. You could find it at 228 in the red hymnal. But let's say we wanted to do another tune that would work with that syllabic count. Can anyone, if you look under your metrical index, under 8787D, and the D stands for double, can you tell me any other hymn tune names that come up under that 8787D?
Is Hymn to Joy Beethoven's Ode to Joy?
That's right. So Hymn to Joy has 3 different instances in the gray hymnal to what we know as Ode to Joy. And that has 8787 twice. Let's try singing.
Greensleeves.
Greensleeves does not work.
No?
No, I don't-
It's 8787.
Come down long expected
Because-
Jesus, does that work?
Which one?
Come down long expected Jesus?
Dum ba da da dum bum bum. That one?
No. Come down, I had it right in my head.
See, this is a classic situation because we all know different tunes for some of the same words, right? So I grew up singing, "Love divine, all loves excelling," but here in the red hymnal, we have it at 228, which I think is going to be, "Love divine, all loves excelling," right? Does anyone know Love Divine to another tune? That's the one, that's Heiferdal. Let's try singing it to Hymn to Joy. So look at the words at is it 228 that I said is Love Divine?
That was 228, yeah.
Look at the words at 228 and let's sing it to Ode to Joy. Let's see. Okay, you ready? Love Divine? Love divine, all loves excelling, joy of them to earth come down. Fixed in us thy outward dwelling, all thy faithful mercies crown. Jesus, thou art all compassion, pure unbounded love thou art. Visit us with thy salvation, enter every trembling heart. So basically, all these tunes in the gray and the red, many of them will work with many of the words. So if I were a minister and I wanted to preach on something and I found a text that I absolutely loved, but it was like a hymn tune that people didn't really know, but I love the words of the hymn so much, I would look in the metrical index and I'd be like, oh, this is this pattern. What other tunes do people know? Like, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. So let's try, let's see, would that work with Come Thou Fount? Let's just try a little bit of Love Divine on Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing and see if that would work. Love divine, all loves excelling, joy of heaven to earth come down. Fix in us thy humble dwelling, all thy faithful mercies crown. Yeah, it works. It works.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, nobody, I think, here has an incredibly strong feeling about, wait, that's Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing. We can't sing Love Divine to those words. You might feel strongly about it. But notice we would not do this with some of the Christmas hymns, Christmas carols, or maybe we will. But I would say that in some, and I've talked to other friends who are music directors, and they often have a sort of pact that some of the classic Christmas carols will just be left untouched. And it's this kind of tricky line that we walk, like, because once in Royal David City, we actually did change some words for that. We didn't talk about the white race or the race, or I forget, there was something that would have been like completely terrible to say. But it's all in context. So when you think about in the red hymnal, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, oh God, Father of this. Father is almost everywhere in this. And it would be sad if we had to not do hymns in the red hymnal just because they talk about God as a father. It's again one of these slippery slopes. And a lot of straight Unitarian churches, they don't have the Pilgrim hymnal. They have the Gray hymnal, and they have the supplement to the Gray hymnal, which we don't have, which has some pretty good songs in it. Speaking of which, since we've been doing Heiferdal, how many of you remember last spring we sang Blue Boat Home?
Yeah.
Anyone? And this has, it's a folk song that has the same tune. And it's, people love it, and then apparently they get tired of it because it gets done so much in some Unitarian churches. But I'm not there yet, I still love it. Okay, so back to the metrical index. When we decide to do a different tune to certain words, there are also things to consider, like does the character of this tune, it might work strophically with iambic pentameter or whatever, but does the character feel right? Like, is it in a minor key when the words are upbeat? Is it familiar to the congregation? Does it actually emphasize text in a meaningful way? So why don't we look at, a good one to look at is Psalm 23, and a few different ways in the red hymnal that people have set the 23rd Psalm. So give me a second to find my notes here as I completely veer off the entire outline that I'd made. So, oh, and by the way, Joy to the World was never written as a Christmas hymn. And I learned that Isaac Watts wrote this when he was sitting under a tree at his estate when he was 45 years old. He was very sick, and he ended up living with a friend for 35 years. And he, because, well, he wrote 6,500 hymns, so he didn't write the tunes, he wrote the poetry. He was sitting there and he was reading Psalm 98, shout for joy to the Lord on the earth, let the rivers clap their hands, let the mountains sing together for joy, let them sing before the Lord, for he comes to judge the earth. And that's where he got the words for joy to the world. There's no mention of Mary, Joseph, shepherds, angels, wise men, or a manger, but it is the most sung hymn for Christmas. And that's one of those where to sing it to a different tune would be sacrilege, and people would probably walk out and never come back. Before we look at the Psalm, 23rd Psalm, take a look in the Gray hymnal. See if you can find, I think it's 241 in the Gray hymnal, in the bleak midwinter.
Oh, I love that.
And also look at the red hymnal at the same time where it's 128 in the red. And I just want you to see how people have changed the words in the Gray. See if you can find what is different, what they changed between 128 in the red and 241 in the Gray.
Well, Christ and our God is one.
Second verse is completely
So, could someone read the poem? Could someone read verse 1 and someone read verse 2 in the red, just briefly? Someone want to read verse 1? The original Rossetti poem?
In red.
Yes, Joan.
In the bleak midwinter, frosty winds make moan. Earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow. In the bleak midwinter, long ago.
Great. And could someone read verse 1 in the Gray hymnal? Is it the same or is it different? It's the same.
Same.
Okay, how about verse 2 in the red? Jackie, can you read verse 2?
Our God, heaven cannot hold him, nor earth sustain. Heaven and earth shall flee away when comes to rain. In the bleak midwinter, a stable place sufficed. The Lord God Almighty, Jesus Christ.
Okay, is it different in the Gray?
Yes.
Okay. Christ, a homeless stranger, so the Gospels say, cradled in a manger and a bed of hay, in the bleak midwinter, stable place sufficed, Mary and her baby, Jesus Christ. And then verse 3 is also different from the Rossetti poem. So this is a case where it's a poem that was written for a reason, with certain rhyme scheme and alliteration and very careful imagery, and it has been completely ignored in this instant in the Gray and rewritten. And it says words by Christina Rossetti and new words by John Andrew Story. So if I were Christina Rossetti, I would be very upset that someone had done this to my poem. For the sake of making it more inclusive language and more modernized. It also changes the meaning a little bit. But this is one of those slippery slope moments where the Gray hymnal does a lot right. It does a lot right with hymn tunes, but it also, I feel like some of the editors, they didn't need to include this in there and then change the words. They could have just not used in the bleak midwinter and then, you know. So there are things like that. Then, and of the Father's love begotten is another one. If you look at how they changed it in the Gray, of the parent's heart, something or other. Let's see here. Just want to see how they changed that one. I don't see it actually, and I know it's in here. Maybe it was in the New Century that we did it. Was it New Century?
It's of the they keep of the begotten part, but it's parents instead of father.
Right, and I mean, this is very important because it's something that the covenant of the church is we are an open and welcoming church. So when you think about someone who's never come to First Parish before and they come in and they might be gender fluid, they might not identify, as having brothers or sisters. They might have siblings who are not male, like brother. It's very hard to fully change. There's a fine line where you have to sort of commit to the core people who are here, and also be open and welcoming. And I think from what I can tell so far is that First Parish does a pretty good job of being open to new things, as long as there's acknowledgement that people like some of the old favorites, and that's okay. So getting back to Psalm 23, can someone find out in the metrical index, if you look under Psalm 23, what is the syllabic pattern that you see under the metrical index for Psalm 23? And it'll be slightly different depending on the translation of Psalm 23.
As we're finding that, can I just add a word?
Yes.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, Brandon. I was thinking about, in a place like this that values many names for God, for the holy,
Mm-hmm.
like how we think about the service as a whole, both one service and then, a series of services as thinking about the balance as a whole as we zoom out, so that there's room for God the Father and the Mother and maybe the parent, but that each name, thinking about it as part of the chorus over time and through the prayers and the sermons. And
Right. It's not just on the hymns.
Yeah.
It's the whole
But there is
service.
there is a special power that comes in the hymns when we're singing it collectively.
Right. And you've probably heard when you sing, you pray twice. Because we all have earworms, probably on Sunday, there's certain tunes that stick in your head after the service. And that can be good, and then sometimes it can be like, how will I get this out of my head? But that's the power of music, to seep into your subconscious, into your dreams. I mean, I've had dreams of music. All right, let's see here. I'm having trouble finding. Has anyone found where Psalm 23 is in the red? 84 in the Metrable
But I
Index.
couldn't find it in the index.
Oh, I don't know in the index, it's the 84.
So my king, is it, the King of Love, my shepherd is one version of Psalm 23. So let's take a look at,
84.
is it 84? Okay. If you look in the index of first lines and you see the King of Love, my shepherd is, you'll find that there are two hymns, 79 and 80 in the red hymnal, that are Psalm 23. And then also 84 is the Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. So in the red hymnal, there are actually 3 different settings. And let's sing a verse of each one. So let's sing, and then I'll see how it makes you feel. So if you, what each one makes you think about. Let's take a look at the first one at 79 in the red hymnal. Oops. I guess I'm supposed to be over there talking. Like, totally not doing what anyone. Okay, but can I, how do I turn, okay, there we go. We don't need that. In fact, you can all probably hear me just fine like this. 79, the King of Love, my shepherd is. So that goes, the King of my shepherd is, whose goodness filleth heaven. I nothing lack if I am his, and he is mine forever. And let's try number 80 across the page. The King of all my shepherd is, whose goodness filleth heaven. I nothing lack if I am his, and he is mine forever. And 84. This one, I don't know if anyone's heard this one, but let's try it. The Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want. He makes me down to lie in pastures green. He leadeth me the quiet waters by. So I'll just tell you a few things that I would be considering, and Sarah and Kit chime in on what you think too. If we had to pick from these 3, and we wanted to do a Psalm 23 hymn, I personally would do number 80, and that's because I'm thinking number 80 in the red. I would choose that one, but I'm curious what other people think. And that's because I'm thinking from an ease of singing standpoint. Da, 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 da. It's a little slower. People can kind of get their bearings because not everyone is a singer. And it's a little bit, the range is much narrower. No one has to sing high at the end and like worry about sounding weird next to their neighbor. Like, I don't know how to sing this. And so I try to put myself in the shoes of the person who doesn't think of themselves as a singer, but who is really wanting to sing the hymns. That's what I think of. Because anybody who is a professional singer could sing any of these 3, no problem. But that's sort of how I'm thinking. But I'm curious, what is your feedback? Yes?
But for me, the second tune wins, but for a different reason. It's much more serene and flowing, and the meaning of the song is, I'm safe, and
Yes.
the Lord will keep me safe. So
Yeah.
to me, the music fits the meaning of the song.
Yes, and I would agree on that too. Sorry, let me just fix this. Oh, it's like icy. Okay, there's like a cool, uh-oh, I think I might have just broken it. Wait a minute. I just like took it apart and this is my Killix, there we go, alright. But how great that it has Velcro on the bottom. Okay, because you know, when you play, usually the pedal like slides all over the place, and there's a, like when I've played gigs, you know, you're like trying to get the pedal back as you're playing. And, anyway, yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Does anyone else have any comments on how these are set?
For me, the second, number 80 is more familiar. I mean, I know that tune more, but it could be because it's easier to sing and we sing it more often. I
And
don't
that's
know.
what tends to happen, is
Yeah.
that people sort of are like, oh, that's the one we always do. And why is that? Because it's usually, it's a little easier for people to sing. It's not that these other ones are particularly that hard, but yeah, the hymn for 84, that tune, I don't think I've ever sung that tune.
I have.
Maybe in,
Yeah, we
you
could
have?
have.
This brings me to another point. So probably all of you know about the Sacred Harp and Southern Harmony. So these were often done for, you know, a lot of people, most people did not read. There wasn't, we couldn't afford to have like printed hymnals in most of these churches, you know, even 50 years ago. And during certain movements, like the Methodist movement, you know, outside with tents, and then you have the evangelical movement, where it's not about looking at a book, it's about feeling it in your heart. And then you have the gospel tradition, like what RL was doing with his choir last Sunday, for those of you that went, learning by rote, learning call and response, and just feeling it from the heart and not trying to be exact and perfect, but instead feeling like you were directly singing to God. And this is something that I learned, is that Isaac Watts and John Wesley were the first people to actually personalize hymn singing. So Martin Luther, take a look at number 1 in the red hymnal. Do you see the word I anywhere in number 1 in the red? I see a lot of our this, our God, and a sort of overarching doctrine. Time like an ever-rolling stream. I mean, this is one of the most powerful hymns of the Lutheran Reformation. It was considered like the hymn of the Lutheran Reformation, the main anthem. But then Isaac Watts came along and Charles Wesley around the same period in the mid-1700s and said, wait a minute, I have a personal relationship with Jesus. I want to talk to God like with a plea, you know, and use my own voice and personalize it. So let's take a quick look at one of those. Let's see, I actually had chosen some great Isaac Watts ones that show.
Be still my soul.
Be Still My Soul. Yeah, that's one that's very personal, right? And it doesn't, we're so used to this now because. and
Blessed assurance.
Blessed Assurance, yes, exactly.
This
Great
is my
one.
story, this is my song.
Totally, excellent. That's, I don't think, is that a Watts one? I don't think so.
Fanny Crosby.
Fanny Crosby, who also wrote over 6,000, maybe actually 9,000 hymns or something. So Fanny Crosby was born, and at age 2 she became blind from a disease, and she was never bitter about becoming blind. She just decided to write hymns, and that was her passion. So actually, Fanny Crosby has the most hymns in the red hymnal of anyone, which I was very surprised
One
at.
of the most prominent female hymn writers as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I actually kind of wish that we could do this kind of discussion at some other point, because this is such a rich, yes.
Where are they all?
Where are they?
The 6,000 hymns?
Yeah, I didn't see
Well, there
There-
was
there
some
are
quality
500 in most
control
hymnals.
going on because they couldn't put the 6,000 Isaac Watts hymns and then the 6,000 Charles Wesley hymns and all the Sacred Harmony. I feel for the editors of this red hymnal and the editors of the gray hymnal, because they basically had to all have a lot of meetings back and forth, like, oh, we've got to include this one. How can you not do this one? So Yeah, we do have a lot of Fanny Crosby in the red, and if you look her up under the composers and arrangers, you will see a lot of the numbers next to her name. Okay, so let's take a look at I Sing the Mighty Power of God, often one we do on Easter, in the red 681. No, nope, in the gray, I guess in the gray, 681.
I didn't see any
Um,
box in the red.
It's under Isaac Watts, I think.
Oh, 681.
What was the number
I
again?
think it's,
Is it only?
I wonder if I'm getting this wrong. I sing,
415.
oh, it's 68. I Sing the Mighty Power of God. I think it's in the red, so 68. Yes. So does this one have a personal, I mean, this is so obvious, yes. This is personal, right? Like, so this is thanks to Isaac Watts, whose name is in the very upper left corner of number 68. He said, I want to talk to God myself. So I sing the mighty power. I sing the goodness of the Lord. But then he also put in some doctrine, some overwhelming universal doctrine in the third verse. There's not a plant or flower below, but makes thy glories known. So he didn't have to the first two verses are about I, and then the third verse is, and clouds arise and tempests blow by order from thy throne. And this is a beautiful thing that probably all of you who love poetry know, is that the poet will often bring you in the first stanza. There's something in the poem that just is like a very vivid image that pulls you into the world of the poem. And then the last phrase or the last stanza of a poem is often the outward. Not necessarily, there's no one formula for poetry, but that many hymns use this idea of pulling you in with I, and then the final verse is a statement of the world and God's kingdom. And so when we think about good opening and closing hymns, we think about hymns that have this breadth. When we send the people out into the world, and we're thinking in our staff meetings, what will send them out with this message from I to we?
Or, yeah, widening of scope across space or time. I think like the end of Amazing Grace, when we've been there 10,000 years, you know, there's this like, phew.
I'm losing my voice now, so that means we should probably wind down. But needless to say, I got through like 5% of all that I was going to talk about. But I did learn a lot. And the main things I want you to get from this is that there's a lot of fluidity between the texts that we have in these hymnals and the different tunes that work with those texts. And we don't often play around with it that much because we don't want to upset. I mean, one thing is we don't want to upset people who are so used to this tune for this. Like, you might have noticed for Christmas we did O Come, O Little Town of Bethlehem, and we did two different versions. So at the 5 o'clock, we did the one that many know and love, which I know and love. Then for the late service, we did the tune Forest Green. And I chose that because, and we all agreed, some people would be like, what? I don't know this tune for O Little Town of Bethlehem. But there were so many other standard carols that we figured, okay, people will like cut some slack on this one. And there's a beautiful descant that lifts your spirits that does not exist for the other version of O Little Town of Bethlehem. So you might have noticed there were a lot of descants that happened on Christmas Eve. And those are the very high when the sopranos veer off into a whole new tune and sail in like this ecstatic place where people are like, whoa, what's happening? And you'll hear descants on Easter as well with the trumpet. And the sopranos will do some too. So I think Yeah, there's just so much to say about hymns because there's so many stories related to all of these. One thing I learned is that Be Thou My Vision, which is another one that I love. The tune name is called Slane, and Slane is a hill in Ireland that St. Patrick decided to break the rules that the Irish king at that time said no one may light a fire on the hill on the spring equinox before I do. Because I'm the king and I get to rule the fire and declare we are a pagan nation connected to the seasons, and the equinox is a pagan event. And St. Patrick said, I'm going to light a fire in honor of Easter. And I'm going to light candles all around on this mountain called Slane. So, the Irish king could have put him to death at that moment because he defied the orders and he created a fire before the king did. But he was so impressed with the devotion that St. Patrick had for his Christian beliefs that he allowed him to keep on doing that. And so the tune Slane then became a folk song in Ireland, which had nothing to do with the words, Be Thou My Vision. But it turns out that those words, Be Thou My Vision, go way back into the first few hundred years of this century. I mean, of like 200, 300 AD. And that those words were written and sung in monasteries in Ireland, and then they became linked to that tune, Slane. Yes.
My very favorite hymn of all times is 217, and it's another Slane one, and it's Lord of all hopefulness.
Yes,
And
Lord of
I
all
love the
hopefulness.
words, and you never sing it, so please sing it sometime.
Okay.
It's just so spiritual to me. It's been there,
I love Lord of all hopefulness too.
but please sing it.
Oh, it is beautiful. I love this one.
I love it. It was Ken Bergen's favorite one, and we sang it with Roger, and I don't remember singing it ever since.
Yes. And then in the gray, there's Wake Thou My Senses, also sung to Slane at 298 in the gray. We're just scratching the surface of all the amazing stories connected to many of the hymns. The Agincourt, the Battle of Agincourt during King Henry V was against. This is beyond my facts about history and. Anyway, there's this in Deo Gratias and the Agincourt hymn, which they used in a movie where they were fighting on the battlefield singing this hymn that is in our hymnals. There's a lot of emotional resonance and historical resonance that goes with every single one of the hymns in here. And I find that this is important to know that when we're singing, and this is the last thing I'll say, that when we're singing in church together, it is a sacred thing to do. People don't sing together in other parts of life. And it's a way to entrain our hearts together, because when we're singing with a certain beat, which is what hymnody does, it gets all of our hearts beating at the same rhythm. It's something that isn't talked about, but in choir practice, it's something I think about. That when you're singing together, you're actually finding a sense of commonality, and it just happens naturally. It's a resonance, and it's very, very powerful. So every time we have to sing something that you're not sure, like what is this or why are we doing this, just know that it was chosen for reasons, and that it has a lot of meaning for other people. And so I think all of you do that. You sort of, all right, we'll get to my favorites eventually. And but please let all of us know on the staff about your favorite hymns. We have these 25. If there are other ones that are not on this list, I'm going to put this over here. This is your chance to write down your
In
personal
clo- in
ones.
closing though, can we sing
Yes.
217?
In the
In
red,
the red.
Oh, yes.
217, which
So
one
we're
is
gonna do it right
this?
now, we're all here. At least one verse, you know.
All right,
217. I like the words.
let's do it.
217 in the red.
Lord of all hopefulness. Why don't we just sing all four? I mean, it's
Oh,
not gonna
okay.
take very long.
This is outstanding, the whole.
Yeah.
Thank
I will, actually, next time I do this, I'm actually gonna have a PowerPoint, and we're gonna have like images, we're gonna have bulleted lists, we're gonna have dates.
You did great. There's a lot of
We will.
information.
We will. And it is just, yeah, we've just literally scratched the surface because there's so many styles of hymns. And, like here, this is like a perfect thing for a PowerPoint. I just. All right. Thank you all for staying, and thank you for diving into this.
And also, if you can, with the notes being pointed out to you, you can read the words better. Sometimes it's hard to decode. Oh, thank you, I love that.
This is what we see on
This topic,
It's really fun.
there's so much. I want people to get the metrical index idea. What are these numbers? And maybe Nate sometime could talk about.
But it's hard because you look, I was looking and saying, when are we
and how
gonna
they
do a
fit
theme?
with the tunes or
You know,
something.
it's hard to always have the
I'll
theme.
prepare a PowerPoint because it would be good to have one, and then it could be much easier.